Hi everyone, my name is Rob Power and welcome back for another installment in the Teaching and Learning with Mobile Technologies Summer Vodcast series. I'm speaking today with Dr. Agnes Kukulska-Hulme from the Open University of the UK, and today we're talking about mobile assisted language learning. Welcome, Agnes.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here this evening in the UK.
Thank you, Agnes. First of all, can you tell us, when it comes to using mobile technologies for language learning, why mobile devices and mobile learning for language learners? What is the big draw?
Okay, well, I've been working mainly with adult learners over the years at the Open University and across the world. So I look at what's possible mainly in relation to adult learners, but obviously also having paying attention to what's happening in schools and how things are developing there as well. And I'd say that we can look at it from the point of view of what mobile learning in general has to offer. So, you know, things that we can come to expect from mobile learning, such as greater flexibility or personalization of the learning experience, and learners being more aware of their own needs and being able to set their own goals more readily than they could in other contexts. But I think we can also then look at it from the point of view of language learning specifically. So what is it that mobile devices, mobile learning approaches offer learners who are learning languages in particular? So when we take that kind of perspective, I think that we need to look at it then from the point of view of our contemporary societies, the way that we are all increasingly more mobile, and so language learning is tailored to some of our new experiences of working in other countries, traveling more, studying abroad, and so forth. So mobile learning then in that context supports those activities and responds indeed to the needs of those particular activities. I think also we need to be looking at the way that our societies are increasingly more diverse, bringing us into contact with more different kinds of people from more varied backgrounds than was the case in the past, both face-to-face encounters and on social media, online courses, massive online courses, and so on. So we've got these new challenges facing us, really, in terms of communication across the globe with more varied people. And I think mobile learning fills that gap. It sort of enables us to respond to those challenges. The other thing that I would want to highlight is that with mobile learning, learners are enabled to practice, to rehearse over longer periods of time. They're able to fit that activity in with their everyday lives, so with their work, with their travel and commuting patterns, and so on. So I think then it's about the ability to support that ongoing continuous practice and rehearsal. And also I would mention using your environment as a learning resource. What can you learn in terms of a new language from your immediate environment? So for example, if you are in a target language country, then what are the resources around you that you can use, whether it be by just observing them or by capturing some of the way the language is used around you. what people are saying, what you can see on signs and notices around you, and so forth. And again, this is where language learning is really enhanced through mobile personal devices that people carry around with them. And I guess another thing that's important to mention, which links in with what I've just said, is the ready access to authentic resources. So, of course, authentic resources to an extent have always been accessible, but mobile devices just give you that much more immediate access to things like news and opinion, things that interest you, that you might want to follow online and learn from that. So it really expands the repertoire of resources available to language learners. So that, I think those are the key aspects that I would want to highlight in terms of what mobile language learning brings to the domain of language learning in the contemporary world.
Well, thank you, Agnes. Are there any drawbacks to using mobile technologies to help language learners?
Drawbacks, yes. Well, there are quite a few drawbacks. I think we can, again, look at it perhaps from the point of view of the drawbacks of mobile learning in general, and those will apply equally to mobile language learning. So things like the costs of mobile learning. In general, it's regarded as kind of low-cost technology. But of course, when you think about the latest smartphones and being connected to the internet, downloading videos and so on, it can prove to be a costly experience. So there are various areas like that that we have to think about in relation to language learning. Another area that I could mention is the capacity to be distracted in the course of learning. So you might be doing a very beneficial activity, but you get distracted by messages or notifications that come in and disrupt your activity. So I think we have to take account of those kind of general drawbacks associated with mobile learning, and I could go on to name more, of course, but perhaps just focusing back on language learning again, and thinking about what drawbacks that has. I guess I would want to say that an important drawback is the fact that we're experiencing a kind of a shift away from face-to-face interaction to more mediated forms of interaction, just as we're experiencing today through the vodcast. But equally, when using mobile technologies, the interaction between people is increasingly a mediated experience, mediated by technology. This has advantages and drawbacks, and I think the drawbacks come in the form of alterations to the way that relationships between people are constructed, and the way that people are able to express themselves via, the mobile device and the various communication channels that it offers. I think also another worth mentioning in terms of drawbacks is one that is often highlighted when I speak to different audiences around the world on this topic, and it's the impact on teachers. So teachers, experts in mobile learning, in language learning, see mobile technologies as a threat to their profession and their expertise, and they feel often very uneasy about what's happening. They work under a lot of pressure, so they don't have time to explore mobile applications and the latest technologies and so on. And they often feel very pressured and and uncomfortable with the rate of progress, the rate at which mobile learning is advancing. So I think that is a drawback because it is really very necessary to think about learners and teachers working together and feeling confident about the language learning experience. So those are some key factors. Maybe just one more that I would like to also mention would be the lack of mobile language learning materials in some languages, in many languages indeed. So if we think about the way that, if we think about the most common languages that people want to learn across the world, English of course, Spanish and other popular languages, then there are a lot of materials available, a lot of apps available and so on, but that isn't the case for the lesser known languages or those that are not learned so frequently. And I think that is a drawback still, so the lack of resources for some learners who need to learn languages that are not quite as popular as the others. So I guess those are the main drawbacks that come to mind in response to your question.
Oh, thank you again, Agnes. Can you give us a little bit of an idea how you have been working with mobile-assisted language learning at the OU and in the UK?
Well, we've been in this area for working in this area for quite some time now, really going back to the turn of the century. And in the early days, the focus was very much on delivering materials that students were studying, and so open university students, making those accessible on mobile devices. And we started with texts, so thinking about how print materials could be delivered as electronic texts on mobile devices, and how students worked with those materials. And that sort of theme of facilitation of access has continued. We have made it our business to provide, to make our materials accessible. So increasingly, of course, in various media formats and across a growing range of devices, tablets as well as phones and other portable devices. So it's been very important for us to facilitate access. But then on the research front, we have undertaken more, I suppose, projects that have been closer to more specific learner needs. So thinking about Open University students, for instance, who are distance learners, they don't get a lot of opportunity to practice their speaking and speaking skills, particularly also listening skills. So we have focused on those in some of our projects. And we have also had a major focus on investigating learner practices. So what we're interested in is, what are learners doing for themselves? What are they already doing? How are they using their mobile devices to support their language learning? So we have conducted a number of surveys amongst for example, those studying languages, also some other students. And we've looked at how they use their mobile devices, how they use different applications, what they value about those applications, why they've chosen them, what their motivations are, what are their favorite apps, what would they like to be able to do, and so on. And this research has given us a lot of insight into how the students learn, where they learn, and how their suppose learning experience is changing, has been changing over the years. So we've done a lot of that kind of research, and as I mentioned, in relation to listening and speaking skills, so we had one project which looked at listening, speaking, and oral assessment, for example. And in that project, the associate lecturers working with the students converted the materials to mobile format. And this enabled students to practice their listening and speaking skills wherever they wanted. So an activity that was in addition to their course. And they could choose where they engaged in that additional practice. And they could record themselves. They could upload those recordings were then available on a website, so the tutors could listen to their responses and comment on them. So that was quite an important initiative for us, and it enabled us to think about what people do between courses. So they're registered on one particular, enrolled or registered on one particular course, studying that. Then they have a gap between courses, and they might want to be continuing with their practice. Or it might be a case of them wanting to just have additional practice alongside a course. So it made us think about where people learn, why they learn, and so on. And also it made us reflect on the choices that we give students. So in a more recent project, I've worked with some colleagues at UNED in Madrid to develop a listening app, looking at how we could help learners to listen more and to have to make it easier for them to listen to podcasts in a target language. In this case, it was people learning English, and they were given the ability to choose some podcasts, different levels of difficulty that they could listen to, and then they could summarize news items that they had listened to, and then share those summaries on Facebook and comment on each other's summaries. So here was an opportunity for them to practice more as previously, but also to share their learning with others by writing down some summaries and being able to read what others had written and comment on that. So I think that approach combines the individual learning element with social learning, which we know works very well. We've also done some work on helping teachers to design mobile learning activities. So we had a recent project funded by the British Council, in which we interviewed learners about their practices. We interviewed some teachers about their perspective on mobile learning, and we developed a number of activities that the teachers could try out with their students, and also a kind of framework that would enable them to reflect on their practice. So all that was packaged up and is available in a free online guide, which is the Mobile Pedagogy for English Language Teaching Guide. It was designed for English language teachers, but is equally applicable, I would say, to teachers of any other language, with the proviso of what I've mentioned previously, in that materials and apps might not be so readily available across other languages. And I suppose another project that is well worth mentioning in this context is the Mazeltov project that we've worked on the past few years. This was aimed specifically at migrant learners in Europe. We developed an interesting integrated set of tools and services to support migrants' learning, including their language learning. And in this project, the learners were able to select from a range of tools and services that were developed for them in collaboration with them in relation to their needs and desires and so on. And this resulted in an app which gives people a choice of different tools that they can use, and really empowers them to reflect on their own language learning needs. So for a lot of learners, this is quite a revelation. They previously were used to sitting in a class, just really listening to what the teacher had to say and following instructions from the teacher. Suddenly they have this powerful tool in their hands, and they can actually decide for themselves, how to approach their learning potentially. And this is both a revelation and a huge challenge to learners who are not used to having that degree of being empowered in that way, having that degree of agency in relation to their learning. But what was interesting there was that we decided what kinds of scenarios the learners needed to be supported in. So everyday life challenges, for example, such as finding accommodation or finding work, or dealing with everyday problems. So we were able to kind of design some language lessons in advance based on what we knew were typical problems and what the learners also themselves said were the situations that they faced. But then in the course of using such a tool, as a learner, you become aware of other things that you didn't really know you needed because it was difficult to think of them in advance. And this is where I think this project could be, the ideas that were initiated in that project could be further developed to think about what do learners actually need at the point of need. When they're in a particular situation and they have to solve a problem, it may be only in that particular situation that they realize they lack certain words or phrases or certain ways of behaving that they become aware are lacking. So I think that's really interesting, and being able to record perhaps in that moment or soon afterwards what you really needed, and thinking from that then and forward to the design of new applications that correspond to those kinds of needs. So what's really interesting about this work is that it takes us very much in the direction of working with learners to make them more self-aware of what are their learning needs, what are their communication needs, how do those relate to specific situations that they face in their lives or at work, and so on. So that's very much moving away from the idea that maybe you have an established language learning curriculum and all you're doing is using the mobile device to somehow deliver it differently. It's really rethinking what learners' needs are in relation to language learning in today's world, and on an ongoing basis. So lifelong language learning, coming back to languages that you learned in the past, refreshing them, taking on the challenge of learning new languages, being able to communicate multilingually on the internet and switching between languages, and all those kinds of new communication challenges that we face within the communication media. So those are the kinds of projects we have led or been involved in, and the latest one actually was last year was Salsa, in which we also explored learner choice, but this time by encouraging them to visit different parts of Milton Keynes, which is where the Open Universities located. So we worked with migrants again. They were encouraged to visit different parts of the city and to discover language lessons there. So, for example, they would visit the council offices, and there a lesson would be triggered on their phone, where they would discover how you use the language that's necessary to interact with staff in the council offices. So, so that combines learner self-awareness with also contextual learning, and I think that's a really interesting, exciting direction which our field is developing. So I think that that covers much of what we've been doing. I mentioned the framework that we prepared for teachers to reflect on their practice, and also in the Mazeltov project we developed another framework, the incidental learning framework, again a way of facilitating reflection on how learning was taking place, and you know, what tools were involved, what outcomes are expected, how language is changing in these new contexts, and so on. So our work has spanned investigation of learner practices through to development and trialing of particular applications, through to conceptual work, trying to understand how learners are going about the business of learning languages on the go.
Thank you, Agnes. You've obviously learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work for mobile language learning. What do we still need to learn?
What do we still need to learn? I think we need to be asking ourselves some big questions. As researchers in the 21st century and as teachers in the 21st century, I think we need to be asking ourselves big questions about what are today's communication challenges, what are the languages we need to be learning, what are the contexts that matter, that make a difference. So I think much as in other disciplines, there is currently a focus on global challenges and how people from different disciplines might work together to try and solve these very important challenges. So I think members of the language learning community and those working with different technologies, including mobile, need to be thinking about what are the sort of fundamental communication challenges that we face in today's world, and coming to some sort of agreement around, therefore, what is worth working on. So I would say that's something that we haven't yet learned. A lot of research still focuses on how to improve learning in order that more students pass exams or perform better in tests, which is important in its own right. People do need to pass exams. They need to perform well in tests because it's important in many countries, many contexts, for people to do that. But it's not the whole story, and I think mobile language learning has opened our eyes to new outcomes, or perhaps just reoriented us to look at different outcomes, to think about what are people learning when they are learning a new language. And if we ask that big question, we can start to understand that there are many outcomes. And in language learning, mobile language learning, one of those outcomes might be being a more self-directed, self-determined learner, when you become more aware of your own needs and your interests and how the technology might support you in following those up. Also various outcomes around collaboration, collaborative learning, outcomes with regard to understanding how language is changing and evolving and how language learning needs to adapt to the new realities where new words are always being created every day, and new expressions are coming into being. So I think mobile language learning encourages us to view language learning differently and to really think about the variety of outcomes that are achieved or may be achieved alongside the more conventional formal learning outcomes, which are typically better results in tests or things that you can measure, such as increased vocabulary acquisition or knowing, being better informed about grammar and so on. So as I say, whilst all that is still important, we've got these new challenges that need to be addressed.
Thank you again, Agnes. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or comment on before we wrap up for the day?
I've been doing some work recently on personalization for Cambridge University Press. This will be published in a white paper very soon, and I think it might be worth reading. I've enjoyed reflecting on this whole question of personalization, which seems to be emerging as a very important issue for those who produce course materials, who publish them, and for teachers, of course. And I think it is helping us to identify where language learning, and so indeed personalization, where it's in the, if you like, in the hands of the teacher, and where it's in the hands of the learner. So the teacher might want to personalize a learning experience for their learners, but the learners may want to have a personal learning experience and personalize it for themselves. So we see these two perspectives coming together, and the white paper that I've written for them reviews a number of examples of personalization in mobile language learning, drawing on various studies and doctoral research and so on, and showing how this can work in practice, and also directions for future research and future development, as I think we've only scratched the surface, and we can see that adaptive learning, personalized learning will become more commonplace, but that it's not all about computers sort of taking over and taking over from the teacher, but the teacher still has a role to play, and that learners will still indeed will be enabled even more to personalize learning for themselves. Do I have time to mention anything else, or are we?
Absolutely.
So I think in terms of new directions, we're also very interested in looking at how language, what are the language challenges that arise in situations such as emergencies, disasters and emergencies, and how mobile technologies and other technologies can come to be used in those situations. It links in well with global challenges around disaster management, and that's something that we're working on at the moment, and I think would be an important new area for development. And just maybe in the last few minutes that we have left, I will give a little mention to some of the work that my doctoral students are doing. I'm very proud of what they're doing. For example, one student is looking at the role of gesture in language learning when learners are practicing or learning using Skype on tablets. And I also had another student who completed his work not so long ago, who was looking at, again, the use of Skype by children to practice their language skills. So I think these projects are important because they foreground the communication aspect of mobile technologies, and then also have a student working on teacher development. So informal opportunities for the development of language teachers. She's looking at part-time language teachers who are using Twitter as an environment to develop their practice. So how they can connect with others, how they can share ideas, form new connections, and engage in informal development, which I think will be increasingly important because, as I mentioned earlier, teachers are very challenged by the new technology environments, but many of them are very excited by them as well, and they take these opportunities to learn together with others and to share ideas, and they can do that obviously in various ways, including on mobile devices. So I think these are very exciting new directions for this field.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Agnes, and thank you for tuning in for this final installment of the Teaching and Learning with Mobile Technology Summer Vodcast series. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.